I still remember the first time I saw him. It was my first day of kindergarten, and my mom was walking me to school. As we approached the crosswalk by the school, I saw him for the first time. The crossing guard. He was an older man, with wispy gray hair under his reflective vest and hat. He stood there with his stop sign held up, waiting for me and the other kids to cross. Even then, at 5 years old, something about him gave me an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was his smile, like he was enjoying some private joke, or the way his watery blue eyes seemed to linger on me just a beat too long. Whatever it was, I felt a chill down my spine as I walked past him that day. In the weeks that followed, I saw the crossing guard every morning and afternoon. He was always there, rain or shine. He never spoke beyond a gruff, "Move along," if we kids lingered too long in the crosswalk. But his eyes followed us, especially me, it seemed, as we hurried across the street. By November, the weather had turned cold. My breath came out in frosty puffs as I made my way to school, bundled tightly in my hat and scarf. When I reached the corner where the crossing guard stood, I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact. His gaze felt like spiders crawling across my skin. "Cold enough for you?" His gravelly voice made me jump. I risked a quick glance up. He was smiling down at me, his chapped lips spread wide. Behind the smile, his eyes were two hard chips of ice. I mumbled something non-committal, not wanting to encourage conversation. After what felt like an eternity, he waved me across the street. I bolted, desperate to put distance between us. The next day, I decided to walk the long way around the block to avoid him. It added 10 minutes to my commute, but it was worth it. As I approached the school from the opposite direction, I felt a swell of relief. No crossing guard in sight. My relief was short-lived. There he was, standing at the next corner. It was almost like he had anticipated my detour. His pale eyes lit up when he saw me, as if we were old friends playing a game. "You're late," he said with a raspy chuckle. "I've been waiting for you." A lump formed in my throat. I didn't respond, just hurried past toward the school. I could feel his eyes tracking me until I disappeared inside. I stopped telling my parents about the creepy crossing guard. They'd just tell me I was being silly and to avoid him if he bothered me so much. But avoidance didn't seem to work. He always found me, no matter which way I walked, and each day his smiles grew wider, his attention more focused on me alone. By Christmas break, I was a nervous wreck. I had recurring nightmares where skeletal hands reached out from the darkness to grab me. I hardly slept anymore. The morning school resumed in January. I faked sick. I begged my mom to let me stay home. She sighed, feeling my forehead. "You're not warm. I think you're fine to go to school." I protested more, tears in my eyes, but she was already late for work. Before I knew it, I was bundled up and on the sidewalk, facing the inevitable encounter ahead. Sure enough, there he was at the corner by the school. My hands immediately started to sweat inside my mittens. I briefly considered making a run for it, sprinting across the street without waiting for his signal. But there were too many cars zooming by. With a churning stomach, I forced myself to approach the crosswalk. The crossing guard's face lit up when he saw me, like a kid on Christmas morning. "Welcome back. I was hoping you'd visit me again soon," he said in his gravelly voice. Bile rose in my throat. I stared straight ahead, willing myself not to cry. After an agonizing moment, he stepped aside and waved me across. Just as I passed him, he called out, "See you after school." Then he laughed, a sound that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. By the time I got home that afternoon, I had made my decision. I had to tell someone about this, no matter how silly it sounded. As soon as my parents walked in the door, I told them everything in a rush. The way he looked at me, his strange comments, how he always seemed to find me no matter what route I took. "Please, you have to keep him away from me," I pleaded. "I'll do anything not to see him again." My parents exchanged a worried glance. "Okay, calm down," my dad said gently. "We'll walk to school with you tomorrow morning. If this guy is really creeping you out, we'll talk to the principal." The next morning, we left early and took the longest route possible, approaching the school from the rear entrance. My stomach was in knots. Somehow I just knew he would be there waiting. As we turned the last corner, I inhaled sharply. There was no sign of the crossing guard. The corner was empty except for a mother and son crossing from the opposite direction. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding for months. We'd managed to avoid him. Thank God. "See, no creepy guard," my dad said, rubbing my shoulder. "It must have been your imagination getting carried away, but we can still talk to the principal to be safe." As we approached the doors to the school, a call rang out. "Hey, wait up." A chill slithered down my spine. Slowly I turned, already knowing who I would see. The crossing guard stood about 20 feet away, waving eagerly as if we were old friends. My dad frowned in confusion. "Who's this guy?" he asked under his breath. I opened my mouth, but only choked sounds came out. The crossing guard ambled over, grinning toothily. "I've been hoping to meet you folks," he said to my parents. "Your girl and I have been getting to know each other in the mornings." He winked down at me. I shrank behind my dad, barely able to breathe. My dad's voice was icy. "Is that so? And who exactly are you?" "Me? I'm the crossing guard, of course." He shook his stop sign as if it wasn't obvious enough by his vest and hat. My mom frowned uncertainly. "But the school doesn't have crossing guards. Parents volunteer when they can." The blood drained from my dad's face. In a flash, he stepped forward and ripped the stop sign from the crossing guard's hand, tossing it aside. He pulled me back by the shoulders, putting himself between me and the stranger. "Who the hell are you?" my dad shouted. "You stay the hell away from my daughter, you hear me?" The fake crossing guard held up his hands with a chuckle. Now, no need to make a scene. I was just trying to help make sure the kid crossed safely." He looked over my dad's shoulder, giving me a slow wink. "You'll always be safe with me. We have a special relationship, don't we?" Before my dad could react, the man turned and ambled calmly away. We watched in stunned silence as he disappeared down the street. The school called the police, but they found no trace of him. It was like he had never been there at all. It's been over 15 years now, but I still feel a chill whenever I pass someone in a crossing guard vest. Could the creep from my childhood still be out there, waiting for another special relationship? The thought terrifies me. I'm extra vigilant whenever my own children leave for school. I tell them to never trust crossing guards. Run the other way if a stranger tries to help you cross the street. My kids think I'm being paranoid, but they don't understand the fear that lingers. Even all these years later, the reassuring smile that was anything but. Those icy blue eyes that haunt me in my darkest dreams. I know he's out there somewhere. I can feel it. And one day, when I least expect it, he'll be there on the corner, waiting eagerly for me to visit an old friend. The first day of kindergarten is always scary. All those new people, new surroundings. It's a lot for a little kid to take in. As my mom walked me to school that morning, I clutched her hand tightly, my stomach churning with nerves. We turned the corner onto the street leading up to the elementary school. A handful of other parents and kids made their way toward the big brick building that would now be my second home. About halfway down the block, we came upon a street crossing guarded by a man in a reflective vest. He held up a stop sign as we approached, his wrinkled face cracking into a smile. "First day of school, huh, big guy?" he asked me with a raspy chuckle. I nodded, studying this stranger. He seemed nice enough, with his hunched shoulders and fuzzy gray hair peeking out from under his hat. But something about him made me move just a little bit closer to my mom. The guard waved us through the crossing, telling me to have a great first day. I relaxed once we were past him, chalking up my unease to first day jitters. The rest of that week I didn't give the crossing guard much thought. I was overwhelmed trying to remember my teacher's name and figuring out the routines of school. My mom continued walking me each morning. Then I rode the bus home in the afternoon. It wasn't until the next Monday that I had another encounter with the guard. As we approached his corner, he broke into a wide grin. "You survived week 1. How do you like school so far?" he asked. I shrugged. "It's okay, I guess." "Made any new friends?" I shook my head. I was pretty shy those first few weeks, still getting my bearings. "Well, don't you worry. You've already got a friend in me," he said with a wink. "I'll look out for you. Make sure you get to school safe and sound." Something about his words gave me a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. I walked a little faster as we crossed, not responding. I noticed my mom's shoulders stiffen just slightly as the guard called, "See you tomorrow," after us. The next few weeks continued like that. The crossing guard always had some little comment for me as I passed by each morning, asking about my day or classes, telling me lame jokes to try and get me to laugh. Harmless enough, but more and more something felt off. I started dragging my feet on the walk to school. I knew my behavior was frustrating my already rushed mom, but I couldn't help it. Each interaction with the guard filled me with intense discomfort, even dread. His attentiveness felt cloying, almost claustrophobic. One morning after dropping me off, my mom must have noticed him talking to me. That afternoon when she picked me up, she asked how I felt about the man. I fidgeted, not wanting to come off as a scaredy cat or anything, but finally I admitted that he kind of creeped me out. My mom's mouth pressed into a firm line, and she told me not to worry. She would take care of it. Sure enough, the next morning she walked briskly toward the crossing with a stern expression. As we approached the guard, she put a firm hand on my shoulder, basically propelling me across the street. "Morning, you two," the guard called out, as cheerful as ever. "We're in a hurry today," my mom replied tersely, not slowing. His smile faltered slightly. "Okay then, have a good one." Once we were a bit past earshot, my mom quietly told me she had spoken to the principal. They didn't think the guard actually worked for the school, so they were going to contact the city to get it sorted out. In the meantime, she told me to avoid conversing with him as much as possible. I felt a rush of relief knowing I wouldn't have to make awkward small talk with the man who gave me the creeps every morning. Maybe soon he'd be gone for good. But when we got to the corner the next day, there he was in his usual spot. I tensed, expecting him to address me directly again, but this time he just nodded politely as we crossed. He must have gotten the message loud and clear. This new arrangement continued for several weeks. The guard remained posted by the crossing, but kept any remarks to himself beyond basic small talk with my mom about the weather. I started to breathe easier on the walk to school, no longer filled with dread. Maybe now things could get back to normal. Then one day in late October, everything changed again. The forecast warned of heavy rain starting around dismissal time. My mom agreed to pick me up from school instead of having me take the bus. As we headed out into the gloomy afternoon, she popped open an umbrella. We were about halfway home when I realized I had forgotten one of my school books back in my desk. My mom sighed in annoyance, but agreed to turn around. No one wanted to deal with a cranky teacher the next day. By now the sky had opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. My mom held the umbrella over us as we retraced our steps through quickly forming rivers along the sidewalks. As we approached the crossing guard's corner, I noticed he was still stationed there, despite the terrible weather. My brow furrowed. Why hadn't he sought shelter by now? I tried to give him a wide berth, splashing through the puddles with my head down, but suddenly I heard his gravelly voice cut through the sounds of the storm. "Sure is coming down, huh, kid? You'll catch your death out here." I paused, startled that he was addressing me directly again after so many weeks of silence. Slowly I raised my eyes. Through the veil of rain, the guard's face looked pale and gaunt. His hat and vest were drenched, water dripping from the brim down his hollow cheeks, but his eyes were as alert as ever, boring into me with an intensity that twisted my gut. "Better get inside quick," he said, his tone casual but something strange lurking beneath. "Hate for anything to happen to you in this mess." My mom's hand closed around my arm, making me jump. She tugged me forward through the crosswalk hurriedly. I realized I had frozen, transfixed by the guard's gaze. As we left the curb, he called after us, his voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "See you tomorrow." The sing-song words dripped with some unspoken meaning. I shuddered, huddling closer under the umbrella's protection. We walked the rest of the way in silence, except for the drumming of the rain. When we arrived at the school, my mom told me to wait in the lobby while she grabbed my book from the classroom. I sat on the bench near the office, listening to rainwater gush from the downspouts outside. After a minute, the secretary poked her head out of the office door. "Your mom's on her way back, honey. The crossing guard just radioed that he's coming in early because of the weather." I rose slowly from the bench. "The crossing guard radioed?" The secretary chuckled. "I know, I didn't realize they could do that either. Guess that's new technology for you." My unease grew. I didn't think he worked for the school. My mom said. I trailed off as the secretary gave me a confused look. Of course he works for us, has for years. Keeps our kids safe. We all appreciate him being out there no matter the weather. Heavy footsteps echoed from down the hall before I could reply. Ready to go, kiddo? My mom appeared, shaking the rain off her coat. I glanced between her and the secretary, not sure what to think. She ushered me out the door to begin the soggy walk home. The next morning, I asked my mom point blank if the crossing guard actually worked for the school. Her steps faltered. Where did you get that idea? I told her about what the secretary said. My mom murmured something about a misunderstanding, changed the subject. But I noticed she gripped my hand extra tight as we turned onto the street leading toward school. The crossing was empty when we arrived. No sign of the guard or even his equipment. I thought maybe he had decided to take the day off after yesterday's rain. But as we drew closer to the curb, my breath caught. A crumpled form lay in the gutter just past the crosswalk. Heart pounding, I pulled my hand from my mom's and rushed forward. It was the crossing guard. He was soaked to the bone, eyes glassy, and staring at nothing. His skin had a blue tinge and didn't move when I tentatively said his name. I heard a scream. My mom's? Mine? I'm not sure. Everything after that is a blur. Police sirens wailing in the distance. My mom wrapping me in her arms as I sobbed uncontrollably. Whispers that the guard had been struck by a car in the night and left there, where we found him the next morning. It's been over a decade now, but I still get chills walking past that corner. Whenever it rains, I find myself listening for the splash of footsteps tracking me through puddles. And I can't help glancing into the gutter, half expecting to see the guard's hollow eyes staring up through the grime. Watching me, waiting, a friend till the bitter end. The first day of first grade was a big deal. No more half days like kindergarten. I was finally a big kid, as my parents kept reminding me. That morning I woke up extra early, too excited and nervous to go back to sleep. I lay in bed watching the sunlight slowly stretch across my bedroom walls, my stomach fluttering. Finally, it was late enough that my parents would be up. I scrambled out of bed and got dressed in my new jeans and sweater for the big day. In the kitchen, my dad made a smiley face pancake for my special breakfast. Ready for the big day? He asked as I drenched the pancake in syrup. I nodded, mouth full. We went over the plan. My dad would drop me off at school for the first day. Then I'd ride the bus home. After scarfing down my pancake, I practically sprinted to the car, my nerves transforming into pure, eager energy. This was it. I was finally a real school kid. When we pulled up to the corner by the school, I was surprised to see a crossing guard stationed there. He hadn't been out last year for kindergarten drop-off, but I guess they wanted to make sure the new crop of kids crossed safely. The guard held his stop sign up as we approached, the other hand shading his eyes from the morning sun. As we got closer, he broke into a grin. "Good morning, folks. First day of first grade, huh?" I nodded excitedly. He chuckled at my enthusiasm. "Well, go on then," he said, stepping aside and waving me through. "Have a great day at school." I turned and waved back. "Thanks, mister." My dad and I continued on to the school doors. He gave me a hug and took the obligatory first day photo before sending me off to class. I was already loving first grade and the day had barely started. In the excitement of beginning elementary school, I quickly forgot about the crossing guard. He blended in with all the other new parts of my routine those first few weeks. But slowly I began to notice he was paying me special attention compared to other kids, asking me every single morning how I was doing, if I was enjoying school, who my teacher was that year. Harmless questions, but still something about the way he zeroed in on me made me vaguely uncomfortable. One morning in early October, the discomfort became more pronounced. As I approached with my dad, the guard's face lit up with a wide smile. "There's my girl," he called out jovially. "How was your weekend?" Before I could answer, he noticed the large, colorful bandage on my elbow. His eyes narrowed. "What happened there? You okay?" I shifted on my feet. "Oh yeah, I just fell off my bike yesterday. It's not a big deal." He tisked under his breath. "We gotta be more careful, don't we? Don't want anything happening to my favorite first grader." My dad and I exchanged a look but continued on our way. In the car line that afternoon, My dad brought up the odd interaction. I admitted the guard kind of weirded me out too. My dad's jaw tightened a bit, but all he said was, "Let me know if he bothers you again." A few mornings later, the guard was absent from his usual post. I felt relief walking to school without his unsettling gaze following me. But that afternoon when I got off the bus, there he was in the crosswalk near my house. My stomach dropped. "Thought I'd make sure you got home safe and sound," he called out. His tone was light and cheery, but his eyes bore into me. I kept my own eyes down, muttered a quick thanks, and continued on my way. I could feel him watching me until I turned the corner. That night, my dad again asked if everything was okay. Haltingly, I described the afternoon encounter. Dad's face clouded over. "I'm calling the school tomorrow. This ends now." True to his word, the next morning when we arrived, the crossing guard was gone. In his place stood Mrs. Allen, a parent volunteer I recognized from school events. I finally felt like I could breathe again. No more creepy comments or invasive questions. October passed without incident. The weather grew colder, and Thanksgiving break came and went. Before I knew it, Christmas was right around the corner. On the last day before winter break, my class had a little celebration with cookies and punch. Everyone was giddy knowing vacation started as soon as the bell rang. Outside, the air was crisp and clear, the sun already dipping low in the sky by the time school ended. My breath came out in frosty puffs as I made my way to the bus line. After clambering onto the bus and taking my seat, I glanced out the window. My breath caught in my throat. There in the crosswalk stood the crossing guard. He was staring directly at my bus, rocking back and forth on his heels, waiting. I slid down in my seat hoping he hadn't seen me, but I could feel his eyes follow the bus as we pulled away from the curb. I didn't tell my parents about the incident. School was out for 2 weeks, so I figured I was safe from the creepy guard and his intense stares. I tried to push it from my mind and enjoy my vacation. The morning school resumed. My dad again drove me. As we turned onto the street, my palms began to sweat. "You okay, kiddo?" my dad asked, glancing over at me. "Yeah, fine," I said quickly. Too quickly. My eyes stayed glued out the window, muscles tense. As we approached the corner, I spotted the familiar reflective vest. My heart sank. The guard's face lit up when he saw me, just like those first encounters months ago. But now his grin held an undercurrent of something darker. "Welcome back," he called out jovially. "Have a great first day." My dad tensed but said nothing as we crossed. I know he wanted to confront the man, but with morning traffic building up behind us, he had no choice but to drive on. I stared straight ahead, willing myself not to cry at the unwelcome return of the guard. That afternoon, my dad was waiting when the bus pulled up to the stop. Before I even climbed down the steps, he asked if I had seen him again this morning. I nodded mutely. Dad's jaw clenched. Without another word, he took my hand and marched us toward the school. The crossing was empty now except for Mrs. Allen. My dad went straight up and asked where the regular guard was. Mrs. Allen looked confused. "What regular guard? It's just been parent volunteers like me." The blood drained from my dad's face. He turned to the principal, who had emerged to see what was going on. "Call the police," he said through gritted teeth. "That man has been harassing my daughter for months, and he's not one of your employees." There was a flurry of shouts and phone calls. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived and my dad described the man to a police sketch artist. But it was useless. Whoever he was, the guard had vanished just as mysteriously as he had arrived. And despite a search of the whole area, he was never seen again. The police eventually chalked it up to a stranger in an unauthorized vest trying to gain access to kids. But I could tell my dad suspected it was something more sinister. I still get anxious walking home from the bus stop. I find myself watching the crosswalks, half expecting to see that familiar weathered face waiting just out of sight. To this day, I don't know his motives, but the memory of his eyes, always tracking me, never fails to send a chill down my spine.